Prosperity demands freedom. Freedom is as vital to the economy as water is to life. Water nourishes, strengthens, hydrates, and sustains life. Capital is a kind of water in that it sustains the life of an economy. Capital coursing through an economy is like a river. The water flows through towns and cities and nourishes those who drink from it by participating in the exchange of the market. The freer the market, the stronger the rivers flow, and the stronger and healthier the citizens can be who depend upon it. Their fields can be irrigated, their crops sprout strong, and their reservoirs are filled. However, sometimes external forces, like government, intervene in the market and build diversionary channels and dams that divert the water out of the economic stream. The otherwise free-flowing capital is redirected away from private hands, and the nourishing effect of the water is diminished. Government taxation of citizens is such a diversionary channel. However, some degree of taxation is necessary in order to provide government with resources to function and to fulfill its role of preserving the general freedom of the economic stream to flow. And so there exist two goals for taxation: ensure that the flow of capital amongst private citizens remains healthy and strong, and provide government with adequate resources to function. The government of the United States was established on a very unique set of values, ideals, and principles. Its founders recognized, unlike the founders of any nation before them, that man has sacred liberties that come from God. And of these, the founders perceived economic liberty to be of special importance. And so they designed a government whose capacity to intervene in economic affairs was limited. Thomas Jefferson explained in his first inaugural address, "A wise and frugal government which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread that it has earned. This is the sum of good government," he said. The founders of America very acutely understood that general political freedom is essentially tied to economic freedom. Without the freedom to trade, to produce, to consume, to invest, to save, other fundamental political freedoms break down, such as the pursuit of happiness and the ability to advance one's condition. And so it is therefore the obligation of the people whose government it is to ensure that government does not infringe upon their economic and subsequent political freedoms. Excuse me one moment, I'm just going to collect my thoughts. It's interesting to note that the United States did not always rely on income tax in order to fund its operations. Before the 16th Amendment in 1913, which granted Congress the power to tax incomes, the United States relied primarily on tariffs, on excise taxes, and on duties laid on goods like alcohol, tobacco, and not firearms, but textiles, in order to fund its operations. And under this strategy, the United States was able to pay off its entire debt by the presidency of Andrew Jackson in the 1830s. That included its Revolutionary War expenses and all of its expenses from the War of 1812. So this idea of taxing incomes was a rather far cry from the minimal amounts of taxation that existed before it. And so it was very controversial when it came about. President Theodore Roosevelt and President William Taft were advocates of the proposal, and they believed that income tax was a necessary institution in order to garner greater revenues for the government. But there were many critics who feared that income tax would be a tool of social manipulation and of privacy invasion in the hands of Washington bureaucrats. Samuel McCall, who was a representative from Massachusetts, said in 1913 that the individual will be called upon to lay bare the very recesses of his soul in affidavits. And Richard Byrd from the Virginia House of Delegates expressed his concern in this way, that an army of federal spies and investigators will soon descend upon the state. After its controversial inception, the income tax has had quite a volatile history. Its rates of taxation have oscillated from highs to lows, and the state of the American economy has undulated alongside them. However, its story does have a clear and notable pattern, and that is that low taxes consistently coincide with strong and sustained economic growth, high government revenues, and low unemployment. A couple of examples. In the 1920s, when the top tax rate was reduced from 73 to 25%, unemployment dropped to just above 2%. John F. Kennedy significantly reduced taxes in the 1960s, and in response, government revenues blossomed by $50 billion, the stock market nearly doubled in value, and unemployment dropped to just below 4%. And Ronald Reagan, when he reduced taxes across the board in the 1980s, and the economy responded similarly. It added 17 million new jobs, government revenues doubled, and the stock market tripled in value. Now it's interesting because in between these decades of prosperity and robust economic activity, there are decades of recession and stagnation, such as the Great Depression in the 1930s or the malaise and stagnation of the 1970s. And certainly there are many causes for recession, but I think it's important to note that both of those decades coincided with the opposite tax policy of the decades of prosperity. The top tax rate was staggeringly high in the 1930s, 94%. And in the 1970s, it was similarly high at 70%. Burdensome taxation diminishes the flow of the economic stream to all of its participants. In order to achieve greater economic stability, I believe that it is vitally necessary to reform the income tax policy in this nation. And I think that the flat tax provides the best solution. The flat tax has several key virtues which will mitigate the problems caused by the current progressive tax system. The flat tax radically simplifies the process of taxation. It advocates true fairness for all taxpayers by advocating general economic freedom as opposed to selective taxation. It allows all Americans to retain an equal percentage of their income, and it incentivizes the utilization of the open market as opposed to tax shelters. The open market being where capital is most productively multiplied and where government taxes have the potential to bring in the greatest revenues. So there's a couple of distinct features to my flat tax proposal, and those are that there will be only one rate of income taxation for individuals, 18%. Secondly, all individuals under the income tax structure will be granted a $45,000 exemption, and so essentially what that means is $45,000 of every citizen's income will be exempted from taxation. All other exemptions, deductions, and credits will be eliminated from the tax code. The corporate tax structure will similarly resemble this model, in that corporations will be also granted an exemption and then taxed at 20% on whatever money they make above that exemption level. So why these reforms in particular? Well, as I mentioned before, the flat tax dramatically simplifies the process of taxation. It accomplishes a widely identified goal, a goal identified by both sides of the political spectrum, of eliminating the burden imposed by the current tax system and its complexity on those who are trying to comply with its statutes. The tax code is a total of 70,000 pages. Makes me wonder if they passed the bill before they read the bill. The Cato Institute reports that Americans spend a total of $265 billion and 6 billion hours every single year just trying to understand and comply with the tax code. The flat tax eliminates this grossly wasteful expenditure of valuable human and financial capital, and instead allows those precious resources to be directed towards private growth, the pursuit of prosperity, and the advancement of one's own condition. Next, the flat tax provides economic incentive and social mobility that are missing from the current tax system. Under the code now, the more money that you make, the greater percentage that you have to pay. This imposes a penalty for higher wages, a penalty for success. Conversely, the flat tax allows individuals to retain an equal percentage of their income. All Americans retain an equal percentage of their income. There exists a greater profit margin, and so therefore a greater profit incentive under the flat tax. Because it doesn't matter if you make $50,000 or $50 million. you pay the same low tax percentage. And shouldn't it be this way? Shouldn't it be more profitable for you to make more money? Shouldn't you be able to enjoy what you've strained hard for and worked hard for? Should you not be able to enjoy the fruit of your labors? The flat tax enables that. Let's talk briefly about the middle class and the effects of the current tax system on the middle class. Did you know that the median income in America today falls into a 25% tax bracket? Economic freedom is vital and essential to mobility, and yet the middle class in America today is forced to surrender a quarter of its yearly capital. That greatly diminishes their economic freedom. The flat tax, on the other hand, affords greater freedom to all individuals to utilize and grow their hard-earned capital and to create financial security both for themselves and for our nation. Lastly, the flat tax makes the open market the most hospitable environment in which to invest capital by reducing the threat posed to capital by burdensome taxation. I was at CPAC a couple of weeks ago, and I sat on a free enterprise session and had the pleasure of hearing from Mike Hill, who is a state representative in Florida. He said, capital is a coward. It runs to the least hostile environment. And what he meant is that people, when they perceive a threat to capital, seek to shelter it. And the threat of taxation in particular incites the utilization of tax shelters and the removing of money from the open market. Ironically, the open market grows money faster than tax-sheltered investments. And so the flat tax, by incentivizing greater utilization of the open market, encourages swifter growth of private capital. As the wealth of the nation increases as a result of rising unemployment, the opposite of that, rising employment, and this swift capital growth, the nation's income base becomes both wider and deeper. And when this base is taxed, even at the reduced rate, government revenues increase over time. This is a historically proven principle by those decades of tax reduction that I spoke of earlier. In the 20s, 60s, and 80s, federal income tax rates were reduced, but federal income tax rate receipts increased. And that was due to the sustained economic prosperity and boom that was afforded by the greater economic freedom of lower tax rates. So there's some who would object to the flat tax on the basis of it removing deductions, credits, and exemptions. I saw puzzled looks on some of your faces when I mentioned that. Hugh Hewitt, in his article, The Tone Deaf, Insulated, and Suicidal Grand Old Party. That's the title of his article. He said that in 2012, no one ran on the elimination of the mortgage interest deduction or the charitable deduction. He says that the elimination of those credits is political suicide. It's unpopular with the public, and it will never happen. If anybody tries to introduce a proposal that has those things in it, it will never be passed. However, the flat tax offsets the removal of these deductions by allowing people to keep a vastly larger percentage of their income in the first place. Let me give you an example. Let's consider that there's someone who earns $100,000 and he has $20,000 worth of expenses for charity and mortgage interest, those two deductions that Hewitt mentioned. Under the flat tax that I'm proposing, his net income after taxation is $70,000. Let's compare that to the current progressive system. Even utilizing the mortgage interest deduction and the charitable deduction, his net income after tax is only $60,000. And so, under the flat tax proposal, this citizen is able to keep $10,000 more of his money every single year. Mr. Cato, what would you do with $10,000 more? Any one of us. What would we do with the economic freedom afforded to us by that kind of money being back in our pockets? And so, ladies and gentlemen, our nation is at a significant crossroads. Will America recapture its unique and precious freedom in order to create and to sustain prosperity, or will she permit government to continue to restrict and mitigate that freedom? There is no political system yet known to man that can offer the same degree of mobility and opportunity as one that is based on economic freedom. Our tax system should make every effort within its power to promote economic freedom, and yet it does the exact opposite. Its absurd complexity and burdensome rates of taxation are stifling the very foundations of our capitalist society built on voluntary exchange. And our nation is experiencing the negative consequences: stagnant economic growth, consistent unemployment, decreasing job opportunities, and less capital for our people to be able to pursue their own prosperity and happiness and dreams. These are mountainous obstacles to overcome. But I strongly believe that they can be overcome. As Ronald Reagan said, only when the human spirit is allowed to invent and to create, only when individuals are given a personal stake in determining economic policy and enjoying the benefits of their successes, only then can societies remain economically free, dynamic, progressive, and alive. I believe firmly in the ingenuity of the hardworking American people. I believe firmly in the power of the American dream. And I believe firmly that history has proven over and over that our people thrive and prosper when their ingenuity and their lofty dreams are encouraged and unleashed. Thank you very much.